The day I stepped off the transport plane, the sky looked too blue to be real. 10 months in Syria had trained my eyes to see only shades of brown, smoke gray, and that strange yellow haze that hung over everything after an explosion. Back here, in the clean air of home, the colors felt like a trick. I kept waiting for the wind to carry the smell of diesel and gunpowder. Instead, it brought the scent of wet grass and airport tarmac. I was 24 years old, a soldier first class in the United States Army. But I felt older than my father had when he turned 50. War has a way of bending time, grinding the days together until you can't tell 1 month from the next. Out there, I measured life by patrols, firefights, and the sound of incoming rounds. Now I was standing on American soil, clutching my duffel bag so tight my knuckles were white, surrounded by strangers smiling, crying, and waving welcome home signs. My own welcome wasn't loud or public. Emily had promised she'd be at the airport, but a work emergency kept her from coming. That was fine, I told myself. I wasn't here for the fanfare. I was here for her, the woman I'd been with for 5 years, the one who wrote me real letters in blue ink because she knew I hated reading long messages on a screen. Every time the Wi-Fi went down in Syria, I'd pull out one of those letters, hear her voice in my head, and remind myself there was something worth surviving for. I got in a taxi, the kind where the driver barely talks, and the radio plays old country music through a static-filled speaker. The streets rolled by, green lawns, kids on bikes, people walking dogs, and I couldn't stop scanning every yard, every parked car. My training was still in me, sharp and restless. Even back here, my eyes hunted for threats. Some habits you don't switch off. When I reached our apartment building, I stood at the bottom of the stairwell longer than I should have. It wasn't that I was tired. My body was used to carrying 50 pounds of gear in 100-degree heat. It was the thought of seeing her again, of finally being home, that made my chest feel heavier than any rucksack. I knocked softly at first. No answer. Then I heard the chain slide, the lock turn, and there she was. Emily. Her hair was longer, darker. She looked beautiful, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker, a hesitation, before she smiled. She wrapped her arms around me, but it was brief, almost rehearsed. I told myself I was imagining it. Combat makes you suspicious of everything, even the people you love. Inside, the apartment smelled familiar. Lavender from her candles, a hint of her perfume. But there was another scent underneath, something that didn't belong. Not bad, just wrong. Faintly masculine. I noticed small things without meaning to. A pair of men's running shoes near the door. A beer brand in the fridge I'd never seen her drink, let alone buy. She saw me looking and said they belonged to her cousin, who had stayed over while she was lonely. I nodded, forcing a smile. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. That night, lying beside her in the dark, I couldn't sleep. In Syria, I'd learned to rest with one ear open for the sound of boots on gravel. Now, in my own bed, I lay awake, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, and wondering if it had always sounded like that, or if she was keeping her own secrets in the dark. I stared at the ceiling until the first light of morning crept through the blinds. My mind replayed her hesitation at the door, the quick way she pulled her phone out of sight when I walked into the room earlier. I told myself it was just the adjustment period. Soldiers are paranoid. We come home with walls we don't know how to take down. But in the pit of my stomach, I felt something I hadn't felt since patrolling the streets of Aleppo. That quiet, cold sense that danger was close. And this time, it wasn't waiting for me in a dusty alley halfway around the world. It was here, in my home. 3 days passed, and I still didn't feel at home. I'd wake up at 5:30 a.m. without an alarm, my body trained to respond to first light. Emily would still be asleep, curled away from me, and I'd wander through the apartment like a ghost. I tried to keep myself busy, laundry, cooking breakfast, reading the news, but my mind kept circling back to those little things I'd noticed on the first night. The beer in the fridge was still there, untouched. The running shoes were gone the next morning, as if they'd never existed. And Emily seemed different. She laughed less, avoided long conversations, and kept her phone face down on the table whenever we ate together. It wasn't that she was cold. She still kissed me goodbye when she left for work. But there was a gap between us, a silence where there used to be comfort. On the third afternoon, she told me she needed to run to the store to get groceries for the week. It might take a while, she said, grabbing her purse. I nodded, trying not to seem too eager about having the place to myself. When the door closed behind her, I just sat there for a moment, staring at the TV without seeing it. And then my training kicked in. Out in Syria, we learned to read a room. Every patrol, every raid, every checkpoint. The smallest details could mean the difference between life and death. You learn to trust your instincts, to follow the itch in your mind that says, something's not right here. I walked to the bedroom. The closet door was half open, a thin line of darkness between the panels. At first, I just stood there, listening. Nothing. I slid the door all the way open, the soft scrape of wood on metal tracks sounding louder than it should have. Her side of the closet was neat, almost too neat. Dresses organized by color, shoes lined up perfectly. But tucked between two of her heavier winter coats, I saw a corner of olive green fabric. It caught my attention instantly. I reached in and pulled it out slowly, my fingers brushing over the worn material. My chest tightened. It wasn't an army-issued jacket. It was civilian, but rugged, with a style I recognized instantly. The left sleeve had a faded patch stitched into it, the edges frayed from years of use. I knew that patch like I knew my own name. Jake's jacket. Jake had been my best friend since we were 10. We'd met on a baseball field, and from then on, he was part of my life like family. We'd built tree houses together, skipped stones at the lake, and gotten into trouble more times than I could count. When I enlisted, Jake was the one who drove me to the recruiting office, telling me I was the bravest guy he knew. He never missed my birthdays, never failed to show up when I needed him. And now, his jacket was hanging in my girlfriend's closet. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the jacket heavy in my hands. My first thought was denial. Maybe he'd left it here months ago after a visit. Maybe she'd borrowed it on a cold night. But the smell crushed that hope instantly. It wasn't the scent of dust or storage. It was fresh, recent. A mix of cologne and detergent, with just the faintest trace of cigarette smoke. Jake's cigarettes. 1,000 images flashed through my mind. The late-night calls Emily claimed were from co-workers. The sudden trips to her mother's house while I was deployed. The way she hesitated when I touched her shoulder 2 nights ago. I put the jacket back exactly as I'd found it. In the military, we learn that sometimes you don't act immediately. You observe, you gather intel, you wait for the right moment to strike. If I confronted her now, she'd deny it. I needed proof. I needed to catch the truth in her own words, or better yet, in her own actions. That evening, when she came home, I watched her more closely. The way her eyes darted to the closet as she walked into the bedroom. The way her voice pitched just slightly higher when she asked me about my day. I didn't mention the jacket, not yet. War had taught me patience, but it had also taught me that once you know who the enemy is, you never let them out of your sight. The days after finding Jake's jacket became a silent mission. I wasn't in Syria anymore, but my mind slipped back into that same mode, alert, calculating, letting the smallest details become part of a bigger picture. I didn't rush. Soldiers learn early that patience is as much a weapon as a rifle. I started every morning the same way. Coffee in hand, seated in the kitchen, listening. Apartments breathe if you let them. The hum of the fridge. The click of the heater. The muffled steps from the unit above. You learn the normal so you can spot the abnormal. Emily's routine stayed consistent on the surface. She left for work at the same time, came home around dinner. But I noticed the subtle shifts. Lipstick a shade darker than she used to wear. Perfume I'd never smelled before. Blouses I hadn't seen in years suddenly making a rotation. And her phone, always face down, always locked, never leaving her sight. I began keeping a log. Not pages of wild theories, just short notes like we did in the field. Date, time, observation. 08:05, perfume stronger than usual. 17:42, stopped at bathroom before greeting me. 19:11, phone lighting up twice in 2 minutes, ignored both times. Simple facts, no emotion. Facts were the only things that survived under fire. By the fourth day, I decided to run a test. While she showered, I stood in front of the closet. The olive green jacket was still there, hanging like it had been since I first found it. I pulled a single hair from my head and laid it across the lapel. Then I gave the left cuff a tiny quarter turn, subtle enough she wouldn't notice unless she touched it. A trick we used overseas to know if someone had entered a room they shouldn't. I closed the closet door and walked away. That evening, she came home trailing a faint scent of cigarette smoke. Emily had never smoked a day in her life, but Jake did. I asked, casually, if she'd been near someone smoking. She smiled and said a guy in the parking lot had lit up as she passed. The answer was quick, practiced. After dinner, I checked the closet. The hair was gone, the cuff was straightened, and the jacket had been moved 2 hangers to the left. 3 changes, all pointing in the same direction. I didn't confront her. Not yet. In Syria, we sometimes spent days watching a single street before making a move. The first sign of enemy movement wasn't the time to attack. It was the time to watch closer, so that's what I did. For the next week, I tracked her like a patrol route. She told me about late meetings at work, about errands that kept her out longer than expected. Twice, the time she was gone didn't match the explanation. She seemed relaxed when she got home, even cheerful. That almost bothered me more than if she'd acted nervous. Then came Thursday. Emily said she'd be working late and might grab dinner with a friend. I nodded, wished her a good night, and let her leave. I waited 15 minutes, then got in my truck. I didn't follow her immediately. Old habits. You loop around, give space, make sure you're not noticed. I caught sight of her car on the far side of town, turning into a quiet residential street. My chest tightened when I saw where she stopped. 2 houses down from Jake's. She parked as if a little distance could erase the truth. She got out, glanced over her shoulder, then walked quickly to his door. He opened it almost instantly. No hug, no kiss. But the way they looked at each other told me everything. I stayed parked half a block away, lights off. In the military, you learn that the enemy often shows more when they think no one's watching. I watched the window glow for almost an hour. At one point, 2 shadows crossed. One taller, one shorter. I imagined the conversation inside, the tone of their voices, the things they might be saying about me. When she finally left, she walked back to her car with a paper grocery bag in her hands. It was a nice touch, cover the visit with a harmless prop. As she drove past me, she looked calm, even content. At home, she set the bag on the counter and said they were giving away bread at the store. "You want tea?" she asked. I told her yes. She made chamomile for me, peppermint for herself. We sat on the couch, the TV playing some comedy neither of us really watched. She laughed at the right moments, but her eyes never reached mine. That night, I lay awake beside her. My mind was back in Syria, hearing my sergeant's voice. Know the enemy before you engage. The worst part wasn't knowing they were together. It was the quiet, the pretending. The way life could keep its shape while everything inside it shifted. I realized something then. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about who I was now. I had been trained to act under pressure, to hold steady when chaos broke loose. But this was a different kind of battle. One fought in kitchens and living rooms, without uniforms or rank. And I knew, with the same cold certainty I'd felt stepping into hostile streets, that the war I thought I'd left behind had simply changed battlefields. The next morning, I woke with a sense of direction. It wasn't rage. That came fast and burned out quick. This was something colder, heavier. The kind of calm you get before a mission, when you've studied the map so long that every street and doorway is burned into your brain. I had no map here, but I knew the terrain. And I knew my target. Emily moved around the apartment like any other morning. She made toast, asked if I had plans for the day. I told her I had a VA appointment across town and that it might run late. She said, "All right," without looking up from buttering the bread. I stored that away. A small reaction, maybe nothing. But small things had been building this entire time. I left in my truck, drove around for an hour, then came back and parked 2 buildings away. From here, I could see our apartment door but still be hidden behind the thick branches of a birch tree. I kept the engine off. Patience was my ally. 2 hours later, she left. No gym bag, no reusable grocery tote, Just her purse and that careful glance over the shoulder that she probably didn't even realize she'd developed. I followed at a distance. 2, sometimes 3 cars between us. She took the same route across town, the same street, the same parking spot 2 houses down from Jake's. It was routine now. That was the part that got to me. This wasn't a one-time slip or a sudden weakness. It was structured, practiced. They had built their own operation, running it with precision while I was just figuring out the perimeter. I didn't watch her go in this time. I'd seen enough of that. Instead, I drove to a gas station and sat in the lot, pretending to scroll my phone while I thought through my approach. The old me, the me before the army, might have barged in and demanded answers. But service changes you. You learn the value of timing, of letting the other side think they have the advantage before you pull it away. When I returned an hour later, her car was gone. I drove home, parked in my usual spot, and waited. 10 minutes later, she pulled in, carrying a bag of takeout. She walked in smiling, as if bringing dinner erased the hours between. "Thought I'd surprise you," she said, holding up the bag. I thanked her, set the table, and we ate. The food tasted fine, but I couldn't remember what it was 10 minutes after finishing. My mind was elsewhere, on the words I needed to say, the tone I had to hold, the way I needed to strip all emotion from my voice so the truth had no place to hide. We washed the dishes together. She talked about work, about a new project starting next week. I nodded in the right places, but inside I was counting down. 10 minutes. 5. 2. Then I stepped back, leaned against the counter, and looked straight at her. "Emily," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk." Her hands froze over the dish towel. She glanced at me, then away, like she was deciding whether to smile or frown. "About what?" "About the jacket in the closet. About the nights you come home smelling like cigarettes. About the route you take when you're supposed to be at work." My words weren't rushed, just lined up, one after the other, like bullets in a magazine. Her face shifted through 3 expressions so fast I almost missed them: confusion, denial, and something close to fear. "I don't know what you think you saw," I cut her off. "I saw enough to know, and I'm not here to yell or to break anything. I just want the truth, because right now, the silence is doing all the talking, and it's not on your side." She leaned back against the sink, arms crossed, a defensive posture, one I'd seen before on men in interrogation rooms overseas. "You've been following me?" she asked. "Yes," I said plainly. "And I'd do it again." "You think I spent 10 months overseas to come home and ignore what's right in front of me?" For a moment, she didn't speak. The only sound was the steady drip of water from a plate in the drying rack. Then she said, "It's not what you think." "That's the problem, Emily," I replied. "It's exactly what I think." She looked down, twisting the dish towel in her hands. Her breathing slowed, and I knew then that she was searching for a way to minimize it, to find an angle where she could admit something without admitting everything. I'd seen it before, with locals who didn't want to betray their neighbors, with soldiers who didn't want to implicate their unit. "I didn't plan for it to happen," she said finally. "Jake was there when you weren't. It was just easy." The words hit harder than I expected, not because of the betrayal itself, but because of how casually she said them, as if easy was enough to justify it. I stepped closer, not threatening, but closing the gap. I faced enemies overseas who wanted me dead. I respected them more than I respect what you've done, because at least they were honest about what they were. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be sorry to me," I said. "Be sorry to yourself, because whatever you thought you had with him, it's already poisoned, and you'll remember that every time you look at him." I left it there. No shouting, no final slam of the door, just the quiet truth between us, heavier than any firefight I'd been in. That night I didn't sleep in our bed. I took the couch, staring at the ceiling until the early light of morning spilled into the room. The war was over, but the battlefield was still in me. Morning light has a way of making everything look cleaner than it really is. That's the lie of daylight. It hides the stains that only show at night. I sat up on the couch, my neck stiff, the blanket halfway to the floor. Emily's bedroom door was closed. I didn't need to open it to know that whatever had been between us was gone. I'd faced endings before. In Syria, they came fast. One moment you were laughing with a guy over instant coffee. The next you were packing his gear to send home. But those were clean cuts. Brutal, but honest. This ending was different. It was a slow bleed. The kind where you don't realize how much you've lost until you're too weak to stand. I brewed coffee and sat at the table, staring at the steam rising from the cup. My hands rested on either side, not touching it. I wasn't thinking about the taste. I was thinking about what came next. Not in the sense of us, because there was no us anymore. I meant my next move as a man. Overseas, when you completed a mission, there was always another one. You didn't get to choose the timing. The orders came, and you went. Here, no one was going to hand me a folder and tell me where to be at dawn. The decision was mine, and the weight of that was heavier than body armor. Around mid-morning, Emily emerged. She looked normal. Hair tied back, wearing a hoodie, holding her phone like it was an anchor. She asked if I wanted breakfast. I told her no. That was it. We didn't talk about the night before. She didn't try to explain further, and I didn't ask. Some wars end in treaties. Others end when both sides walk away from the field without looking back. By noon, I'd made my decision. I pulled my duffel bag from the closet, the same one I'd carried home from Syria, and began packing. I didn't take everything, just the essentials. Uniforms, medals, my letters from her. Not because I wanted to keep them, but because I wasn't going to leave pieces of myself behind. She watched from the doorway. "So that's it?" she asked. "That's it," I said, my voice even. "You made your choice while I was gone. Now, I'm making mine." She didn't stop me, didn't cry. Maybe she'd already done her grieving weeks ago, in someone else's arms. That thought didn't sting like it would have the night before. Now it was just a fact, like knowing the weather or the time of day. When I reached the door, I paused. Not because I was second-guessing, but because I wanted to leave her with something she couldn't shake off. I turned and said, "The difference between you and the enemies I faced overseas is that they never pretended to be on my side." Her eyes flickered. Just a fraction. And I knew it landed. Then I left. The first week on my own was quiet. Too quiet. I stayed in a small motel near the edge of town. The walls were thin, the bed too soft, the TV stuck on a single news channel. I spent hours walking, not because I had somewhere to go, but because I needed to keep moving. Motion was a kind of therapy. I didn't tell many people what happened. My parents got the shortened version. A couple of army buddies called, asking how it felt to be back home, and I gave them the same answer. Still adjusting. They didn't press. Soldiers know when not to ask questions. One night, I sat in a diner with a notebook. The same one I'd used to log Emily's movements. I turned to a fresh page and wrote a list. Not of what I'd lost, but of what I wanted to rebuild. My health. My sense of trust, even if it took years. My purpose. You can't win a war if you don't know what you're fighting for. I thought about Jake sometimes, but not as much as I thought I would. In combat, you learn to leave certain things behind because carrying them slows you down. Jake was one of those things now. If he was man enough to wear my jacket in her closet, he could live with the weight that came with it. The hardest part wasn't losing Emily or Jake. It was realizing how fragile the idea of home really is. In the army, you dream about coming back to a safe place, a place where you can finally exhale. But home isn't walls or a roof. It's the people who stand inside with you. If they're gone, or worse, if they're false, then the building is just another place you pass through. By the end of that first month, I had a plan. I applied for a transfer to a reserve unit in another state. I signed up for a certification program to use my skills in civilian security work. I started running again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel my body doing something it was built for. And I made one more decision. The most important one. I would never let this story be the thing that defined me. In the army, you're taught that no battle is the whole war. You take the hit, you regroup, and you move forward. This was just one fight, and I was still standing. On my last night in that town, I drove past the old apartment. The lights were on in the kitchen. A silhouette moved past the window. Her shape, unmistakable even from a distance. I didn't slow down. Didn't stop. Some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. I slept well that night for the first time in months. When dawn came, I loaded my duffel into the truck, checked the mirrors, and drove east. The sun was rising, casting gold across the road. And for the first time since stepping off that transport plane, I felt like I was going towards something instead of running from it. War had taught me a lot. How to fight, how to endure, how to read the ground before I stepped on it. But this taught me something else. Sometimes survival isn't about holding your position. Sometimes it's about knowing when to walk away. And as the miles rolled under my tires, I knew I wasn't just leaving a place. I was leaving a battlefield that no longer deserved my fight.